Very good afternoon to our audience today. I understand some of you already joined us a few minutes before now. Thank you very much. We appreciate the enthusiasm that you have showed towards these webinars. And a special thank you especially to those who have been with us since we commenced the ICE series 2 weeks ago. Last week, my colleague Folake Adeboale moderated a very vibrant session titled Navigating Cross-Border Anti-Bribery and Corruption Landmines. The theme for today's webinar is the biggest ethical issues facing businesses, the role of governance. This webinar features 2 sessions, which will be moderated by Mrs. Onyida Ehiweri, head of our company secretarial practice at Udodom and Belo-Osagie, and Dr. Maima Belo-Osagie of Council, Udodom and Belo-Osagie, respectively. How should corporates tackle the challenge of corporate espionage and unauthorized disclosures? How can corporates mitigate reputational risks that could arise from whistleblowing on social media platforms? These and more are the discussions that our panelists for today will lead. Without further ado, I'll hand over now to Mrs. Ehiweri, who will be moderating the first session, titled Corporate Espionage and Disclosures. Mrs. Ehiweri.
Good afternoon, everyone. Corporate espionage and disclosures come in various forms. It could be threat of theft of trade secrets, theft of technology, theft of research materials, theft of information that a company can be blackmailed with, theft of customer database, and the disclosure of the stolen material or information to competitors or other users. In looking at this issue and the role that governance and ethics play, we have with us this afternoon a seasoned corporate governance practitioner, a global leadership and governance educator, facilitator, and trainer, Mr. David Olatunji. Mr. Olatunji is a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators UK and the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria. He's a member of the Institute of Directors, is of the faculty of Phillips Consulting Limited and the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria. He was for many years on the faculty of the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria. He has a wealth of experience spanning over 20 years in company secretarial and corporate governance procedures and continues to act as company secretary to both public and private companies. Mr. Olatunji is the founder and CEO of David Olatunji Leadership Academy, a learning hub for managers and leaders in various fields of leadership and governance. He authored the corporate governance study textbook for the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria. You are welcome, Mr. Olatunji.
Thank you very much, Damola. It's nice to be here.
So, sir, we're ready for you.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. Good afternoon to you all. Good afternoon, my co-panelists, Mr. Sam Cookie, and the distinguished participants that are connected already. For me to be invited to share few thoughts out of a subject that I have actually lived with now for close to 2 decades is both a duty and a pleasure. So it's very nice to be invited and it's nice to be part of this great team. It's a duty because I'm convinced, having written a textbook on corporate governance, that good governance is at the very heart of every successful business. It's a duty because business owners and business players should know that good governance is no longer just a strategy. It's not just a culture, but it's now the minimum requirement for sustainability especially when you're talking about the future of the business. And the key content of my presentation, actually, as you have seen, is building an ethical culture, corporate espionage, and the unauthorized disclosures, for employees and other stakeholders within an organization. Into this business environment, I'm not going to run through the presentation slides because of time, but I will just do a discourse with all of us. In today's business environment, shareholders, that is investors of the organization, other stakeholders, they are all clamoring, for good governance. And they have very high expectations that companies should be run in accordance with good corporate governance best practices globally. In fact, recently, International Financial Reporting Standards was introduced by International Accounting Standard Board in response to the clamor for investors for a more credible financial statement in organizations. And therefore, the sum essence of corporate governance is how the management of an organization can align the conflicting interests of all the stakeholders of an organization as closely as possible, ethically and legally. How can we protect the rights of shareholders and other stakeholders? How can we continue shun out ethical products that will benefit the society, that will satisfy the needs of the society? For the investor, the separation between the ownership and management of the organization, which we normally call the agency, agency theory of corporate governance, necessitates good governance, because the owners are not the managers, and once the managers are not the owners, then agency conflicts and agency problems could actually resolve, which is the reason why you have so many unethical practices. That's the reason why you have so many unethical boards, making unethical decisions on behalf of the organizations that is bringing organization to their ruins today. You see, this man, Arthur Levitt, says, and I quote, he says, if investors are not confident with the level of disclosure, he says the capital of the organization will flow elsewhere. If the country also lacks accounting and regulating standards, it says capital will flow elsewhere. It says in every nation now today, good governance is actually the one that is driving, organization. So it is important for us to know that good governance has come to actually take, to take control, to help to prevent, corporate espionage that almost become like an epidemic all over the world today. Other stakeholders also, they are clamoring for good governance. For instance, the society wants a balance between the planet, the profit, and the people, which we always call the three Ps. The society wants the people, the interest of the people to be balanced with the interest of the profit of the organization and the interest, of the planet itself. And that speaks, to ecological footprint and other, and the protection of ecological footprints and the prevention of the degradation of the society by organizations that are working in them. Organizations need to be good corporate citizens, knowing fully well that they have to also be good to other stakeholders, within the society. What's mentioned, though, is the fact that ethics has become a very key issue in corporate governance globally today. As a matter of fact, anywhere in the world where you want to apply for maybe any academic qualification on corporate governance, it covers just 7 key issues. It's not more than that. It doesn't matter whether you are for PhD or master's, whatever. It's just 7 key issues. And one of the 7 key issues is actually ethics. And down the line, we have found out that most of the problems actually the organizations face, which we call bad corporate governance, is actually as a result of ethical issues, ethical problems. In Nigeria, we have seen examples of maybe Guinness. For instance, that was fined almost 1 billion naira, because of expired raw materials. The question is, outside legal, is this ethical, for a multinational organization, to bring expired raw materials to be able to produce unethical products for the society? Anyway, NAFDAC undo that, and that is why Wolfenstein now says that the governance of every organization is as important as the governance of every country today. Now, one of the key issues that corporate governance is meant to address, therefore, is building an ethical culture within the organization. Ethics refers to a code of conduct that guides an individual in his or her dealings with others, in his decisions with others, in his actions within the organization. It has to do with personal behavior and moral duty to protect the confidential, information of the organization, for instance, to make sure that all duties and responsibilities are located to him and carried out ethically. It is concerned with what is right and wrong. At times, it goes beyond the legal, it goes beyond the law, because you can actually be legally wrong. You can be legally unethical. You can actually be working within the law and use some of the things you are doing unethical. In work situation, therefore, it is concerned with principles and practices of moral and good conduct in business life. And we have seen that you have corporate ethics, we have personal ethics, and we have professional ethics. At Anderson, in Houston in 2002, did all it could to protect all the malfeasance of Aaron, all the unethical practices of Aaron. That is violation of professional ethics. And the directors of organization also that are making unethical decisions on the board is also violating ethics as individuals. And I'm sure we all know that all the directors of an organization, they are all liable to all the problems that they create by their decisions, by their deliberations on the board. The banks that collapse in Nigeria actually, the major problem actually is unethical practices. Where one of the banks in 2006 actually released funds to a major loan, to a major client of the bank without seeing the collateral securities, without seeing, the collaterals that their courts actually require the banks to request for before loans of such magnitude is released. Now, according to corporate governance, therefore, companies as good corporate citizens, as integral part of the society, should behave and operate in an ethical way and with integrity. Just like if individuals cannot violate the rights of the other, then organizations also should not violate the rights of others. Corporate espionage actually is like violating the rights of other organizations in order to maximize your own profit or in order to maximize, shareholder value. Adopting an ethical approach to business conduct should be done voluntarily and deliberately because they are good corporate citizens. And one key business practice always considered unethical and often illegal is corporate spying and corporate espionage. Now, the word espionage itself is borrowed from the military. The military intelligence, defines espionage as the systematic use of spies to get military, political, or industrial secrets. Right. Societies have used that before organizations began to use that. So espionage is actually referring to stealing of trade secrets or proprietary information of commercial value that is not in the public domain and which is usually regarded as the property of a company, of an organization, which desires to keep such information secret, confidential, or away from the public domain. Proprietary information can include secret formula. It could be as simple as the formula of Coke, for instance, right? I mean, just jump out of this very quickly, but Coke, in order to protect the proprietary, the proprietary information of Coke formula, have to make sure that only two people know where that formula is per time. They are not more than three people, and the two people will not even fly the aircraft together unless they crash together, right? So proprietary information can include secret formula, processes, methods used in production, of goods and services. It could include recipe that tasty fried chicken, it's holding very close, away from sweet sensation. Proprietary information can include, data of clients. It can include, telephone of clients. It can include anything that is exclusive to a particular organization. It can also include business and marketing plans. It can include customer lists and include customer contacts, and it can also include, peculiar information in your computer system. In many cases, the knowledge and information that an employee has obtained on the job are considered to be an employer's proprietary information. Maybe a particular staff is working on a particular project, or maybe it's sent for a particular training, or and all of that, and it's now deciding to leave, for another organization. That could actually become a proprietary information. Espionage, therefore, is something that can affect companies of any size, and the likeliest threat is from within the organization. The likeliest source of espionage actually comes within the organization. And very briefly, corporate espionage can occur on the following platforms. One, a disgruntled employee giving away or even selling trade secrets. We saw that in 1997 from Gilead. There was a subcontractor working for Gilead, that demoted one of his staff. And because he demoted one of the staff now took a proprietary information that belonged to Gilead and began to send it to all the rivals of Gilead. In fact, FBI has to be, involved in the treating, of that case. We also saw so many cases with Apple. Apple now has gone beyond just telecommunications into
I do apologize. We are not getting your audio very clearly, and we wonder if perhaps yes, it's a little bit unclear.
My audio is not getting very clear. Can I remove it? Hello, is it better now?
No, it's the same thing. No, it's the same thing.
It's the same thing. Okay, let me remove it.
Okay. What about now?
This is much better. Thank you very much. You may continue.
All right. So, I was trying to give examples of corporate espionage, especially from disgruntled staff. I mentioned the one of Gilead, where one of the subcontractors actually had a staff demoted, and because the staff was demoted, was angry with the demotion, how to begin to sell, proprietary information of Gilead to rivals of Gilead as a company. Then Apple as a company now has gone beyond these just telecommunications. They have gone to make researches on self-autonomous cars. And several of their employees, have been found, to work on proprietary information and transferred it from them, to China, to other self-autonomous car companies in China. For instance, there was a man called Zhang, he was a former Apple employee who left the company for a job at the Chinese electric car startup. The car startup is called X Motors. And he copied confidential files of Apple, into a personal laptop, and he gave it to the new company. And so is also another staff of Apple to Shen. That Shen was found, by his team, by his colleagues, trying to make so many confidential pictures, trying to shoot so many confidential photos within the organization in order to copy, the proprietary information of Apple to send to China. So you see disgruntled staff who are not happy again, who are leaving, and they are carrying the proprietary information along with them. In Nigeria, there was some that happened between Unilever and Doyin Paste at that time. Doyin Investments actually had, a subsidiary called Doyin Paste, Doyin Toothpaste, and engineering who then was working on close-up, was trying to change the formula of close-up, from white, to pink color and all that. And all the formula I had, because Doyin then, the chairman of Doyin Toothpaste, employed Engineer Njoku. So Engineer Njoku had to leave Unilever with formula with everything that he had done for Unilever. The case was taken to court, but I think they solved, the problem outside court. Now, so number two is sensitive information being overheard at a convention or a trade show. A very key example that is extremely very important is the issue between Biggie, Biggie sausage and the gala of Mr. Biggs. I had the chairman of Biggie tell me this story that he went overseas to actually look for machines, to do, biscuits and all that. But it just occurred to him that the chairman of Mr. Biggs made a statement in the annual report that Gala is now the cash cow of Mr. Biggs. So he talked about that statement a lot, and Gala has always been around for close to 4 or 5 decades at that time. So he said he just sent for Gala Nigeria, and they sent the Gala to him, and he took it to companies all overseas, and he bought the machines, and that is how he started Biggie sausage, just because a sensitive information was released in the annual reports. And this is the reason why so many managements now, they are very reluctant in releasing sensitive information in their annual reports and accounts, because it can actually be used against them, as industrial espionage, and an employee also leaving to work for a competitor and bringing information with them. I've mentioned that. Then there is also a case between General Motors and Volkswagen, that ended up in the favor of General Motors. Actually, the chief engineer left with about 7 other executives, and they left with everything, that General Motors had, as secrets, as trade secrets, and they delivered it to Volkswagen. And the thing also was taken to court, was settled outside court, and with a very huge penalty, very huge damages imposed on Volkswagen. That $1 billion, they will have to buy spare parts worth $1 billion, from General Motors in the next 7 years, and they will also have to pay as general damages $100 million. So these are espionages that come from disgruntled staff, or staff, they may not even be disgruntled, but just because they want to make wave, or they just want to be promoted where they are going, they want to be seen as stars, then they take the files of these previous companies with them. So the question now, next just 5 minutes now, is how then can good governance, protect companies against espionage? Because espionage, as I mentioned before, has risen now to almost an epidemic levels. As a matter of fact, there is a company in UK that is called G4S. It's actually a multinational security services headquartered in London that has said right now that through espionages, that organizations during the year can lose as much as $1 trillion. And if this is true, and I believe that it is true, then organizations should now, take good governance very seriously in order to prevent the occurrences, of espionage. Number one, it is important that every organization needs to conduct a security audit of their premises, identify, the access to data that they have, identify areas where, the organization is vulnerable to hackers, to unauthorized entries, and so on and so forth, especially when you're talking about other stakeholders that just fit into your organization, like cleaners, like IT servers, like professionals that are just coming to offer one or two services, because clients actually can second, their own stakeholders to rival companies in order to steal their trade secrets. Then it's also very important for every organization to review the processes they have for new employees, to know what information to share with them, when to share it with them, and to restrict them, to certain data. Not fully, they don't know them yet. As a matter of fact, many organizations today employ those that they don't really know. They hardly conduct researches, background researches upon the employees that they are bringing in. Then 3, it's also suggested really that every organization should enforce a clean desk policy. A clean desk policy, CDP. A CDP is a directive that specifies that employees must have a clean desk before they leave. And if there are sensitive information on their table, they should not just tear it or trash it without shredding. You need to shred. You need to make sure that your table is clean so that nobody can come in there while you are not there in order to steal information from you, right? Then it is also important for companies to be able to identify what is sensitive information in the organization. If you're unable to do that, then it is not possible for you to classify them and protect them. Then the company should conduct a risk assessment all the time and make sure that every area where they are vulnerable to espionage from rival company are protected and limited to few staff. Like I mentioned, Coca-Cola actually limited the recipe of Coke to only 2 individuals within the organization at a time. Not more than 2 know exactly what the recipe is and where the recipe is kept. Then finally, it is important for us to train our employees, users, managers, and IT staff, about what all these things, because I have found that organizations actually, it is ignorance in organizations that make them vulnerable to some of these unethical issues. When staff don't know, some staff don't even know that this is confidential enough for me not to disclose. So, and while doing that, they have to classify the information to the one you can disclose and the one that you cannot disclose. That brings in, non-disclosure agreement, non-disclosure covenants, to the employees will be made to sign. There must always be that, because if there is not, some employees don't even know what to tell others, what to take out from the company and what not to take out, at times because of ignorance, or at times also because of commercial benefits, right? And that now takes us, of course, to the final point, where actually there are remedies available for unauthorized use of proprietary information, especially when the non-disclosure agreement is violated, right? There are many cases in court, of course, which time will not permit me to mention. There are so many cases in court right now. You can actually go to court, get injunctive reliefs, for any espionages, and also get damages when it is proven beyond reasonable doubt that this has been stolen. And it is important that organizations introduce this good governance, because at the end of the day, right, intellectual property management, intellectual property protection goes a long way in ensuring the sustainability of any organization into the future. I will just close fully with this quote for individuals that are listening to me. It is from Abraham Lincoln, and it is actually is very common, and so many people must have heard it before. To behave ethically is to believe in a manner that is consistent with what is generally considered to be right or moral. Ethical behavior is the bedrock of mutual trust. Ultimately, the quest for organizational transformation must begin with a personal commitment within each individual to pursue moral excellence. Abraham Lincoln described as the trees and reputation as shadow. Your character is what you really are. Your reputation is what people think of you. Reputation is a function of perception. So thank you so much for listening to me. on this session. I will have to stop there to take in some of your questions as agreed.
Thank you, Mr. Olatunji. You talked so much about employees and how the risk can be mitigated in terms of them disclosing trade secrets. Now, in looking at that, do you think that companies place enough importance on the language and the provisions contained in directors' contracts for service, one, and secondly, in employees' contracts? And how can these contracts be strengthened to reduce the risk of theft of trade secrets by employees, or to improve the company's chances of achieving success in the event that the company is involved in a dispute involving the theft of trade secrets?
Thank you very much, Oyindamola. You know, one thing I have found out in my encounter with organizations, especially with the boards, is that most boards actually in Nigeria don't have code of conduct, code of ethics. Believe me, that's the truth. It might not look like it's the truth, but I've seen very large boards of PLCs without, code of ethics. And this is very unfortunate because for the past 50 years, the major cause of corporate failures is unethical decisions, unethical actions of the board members, unethical products, unethical services that companies are giving to the stakeholders. So the first place to start actually is that every board needs to have a code of conduct where corporate espionage is going to be expressly, stated. And but before then, it is important for every company to be able to identify and classify, their trade formulas, their trade secrets, their information, everything, and classify them as, okay, this one is sensitive, this one is not sensitive. The one that is sensitive, then we restrict it to only those who need to have access to them. And those that need to have access to them, they must have a code of conduct, they must have a code of ethics, give it to them signed, and there must be, there must be an evidence that they have signed it, and they know what is in it, and they know how to carry it out. That look, we are not to release this information even to my wife as a husband. I cannot even release it to my husband even as a wife. This is very, very key, and it has to start from the top. Like I always say, good governance actually should be motivated and influenced from the top. So the board of directors must have a code of ethics, because some of them are even sitting on not just one board, but many boards, at times even rival boards, because the issue of conflict of interest in Nigeria, people are just paying lip service to it. And so if somebody is sitting on the board of a hotel, for instance, and you are taking the secrets of the hotel to another board that you are sitting on, that's conflict of interest, and that is a violation of proprietary information. So it has to start from the board, and from the board it cascades down, to the staff, but only to the staff, that have access to that proprietary information or to that trade secrets. Like the example I gave, the two staff of Coca-Cola, they know that on no account should the two of us even enter into the same plane together, let alone even disclose what they know to any third party. So once there's a code of ethics to back this up, and there are also penalties that violation of this non-disclosure agreement brings, if the penalty is well spread out also, I think people will comply. But that goes beyond corporate governance, because corporate governance largely is voluntary, but it has to now be legally backed up by statute.
Okay, Mr. Olatunji, another issue you raised while you were speaking was the issue of multiple directorships. The Company and Allied Matters Act 2020 provides that directors should not, can sit on the board of 5 public companies, and every director receives information about the company, the company on the board of which he sits. So how does a director ensure that in a bid to contribute and add value to the board of a company on which he sits, he does not cross the ethical line by divulging information of one company to another company that pays him a higher remuneration, or another company that he actually has more interest in.
Thank you very much. That has always been the case. As a matter of fact, when the Financial Reporting Council started, public hearing, is one of the things I raised. To even sit on the board of 5 companies, for me, right, is I don't subscribe to that. Number one, they're too many, and that's the reason why not many directors are actually very effective. We may not see these outside because they have names, but when we carry out board evaluation, we know that they are not very, very effective because they are sitting on too numerous companies, and some of them are not even organized to do that. Now, back to your question anyway, you see, it is difficult as far as human beings are concerned for you to know an information of First Bank and not release it to board deliberations of Zenith Bank. It's very difficult. And that is why the only way out actually is for every organization to have a code of board ethics. This is very key because, as I mentioned, not many companies have it. They don't have board ethics. But that board ethics is not, I'm not talking about board charter. I'm not talking about articles. I'm not talking about memorandum. I'm talking about a document where the only thing that it specifies is what is ethically wrong for us to do as board of directors. It is ethically wrong for a director to release the formula of a board. Is sitting onto another board that is also sitting on is ethically wrong, and it must be stated in that. So if I take that First Bank, for instance, code of ethics, and they tell me that, okay, you must not release our says, like I mentioned, the chairman of Mr. Biggs released an information that, Ghana is our cash cow, and somebody smart enough just pick that and now brought competitive force against Mr. Biggs. It's really big force against Mr. Biggs. Mr. Biggs actually is under trouble because of that biggie sausage. And just because somebody released an information that he thinks or he thought at that time was harmless. So when there is code of ethics, then it's an issue of what do we even report? For instance, there's a sustainability report now that is a standalone report from annual report and accounts. What are the things that we should report? What are the things that we shouldn't report? Every board must sit down, and classify this information. This is the information we need to report. This is the information we must not report. At times, even if the law say report it, there's a way you make sure that it doesn't harm your organization if it is reported. So I still come back to it that the solution actually is every organization must have its own board ethics, and there you must classify trade secrets. Board of directors, you have access to confidentiality. The reason why we are paying you actually is paying you for confidentiality, and so you must keep the secrets. And most times it's actually going to be a gentleman agreement because we won't be following them all about. And that is why I believe so much in personal ethics, right? As a matter of fact, I raise personal ethics above corporate ethics because down the line, self-governance that does these things. The banks that collapse in Nigeria, I know so many of their directors. In fact, so many of their directors who are my colleagues, thoroughly educated in corporate governance. The bank chiefs, they have access to so many CBA, code of corporate governance, at the Peter said, code of corporate governance, the Basia code 123. They have all these things. Yeah, the bank collapsed because of unethical practices. So it's not just about corporate ethics now, it is about personal ethics that they have not brought to bear on the running of their organization. And that is why the code of corporate governance in UK, not in Nigeria, the Financial Reporting Council code does not specify that. Yes, please.
We'll have more time for you to speak because we still have a question and answer session.
Thank you.
I have gotten the gist of your answer in terms of putting in place a code of ethics for both the board, for the directors, and for the employees. Yes, to follow. Thank you very much. Please stay with us as we go into the second section, which will be moderated by Mrs. Belo-Osagie.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Olatunji, and thank you very much, Oyinda. I'd like to join in welcoming all participants to our UBO's Investigations, Compliance and Ethics series, which seeks, among other things, to remind or to inform our participants about the depth of Nigerian expertise that is available to assist with advising on and resolving business needs and issues. Mr. Olatunji has given us a really deep insight for which we thank him into disclosures and into corporate espionage. And I now have the pleasure of introducing another expert in the corporate governance field, Mr. Sam Cookie. I'm not going to read Mr. Cookie's biography, as this will be provided as one of the slides, but suffice it to say that while still maintaining his architectural skills, Mr. Cookie has become an expert in the field of corporate governance and compliance, and he's a much sought-after trainer, facilitator, and board advisory expert in this field. Although he covers all aspects of corporate governance, today we've asked that he focus on whistleblowing and social media, and in particular, on how these can be used as positive corporate governance tools, thereby reinforcing the sustainability and ultimately the profitability of any business entity. Mr. Cookie, over to you. May I have you unmute your microphone?
Certainly. Good afternoon, everybody. Good to be here. Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you, David, because you've led us very naturally into what we're going to do. This bit about the whistleblowing, I'd like to start by challenging some of the paradigms that we have about governance. And there are good examples from David's talk. I will allude to them as we go. But I will do first a look at the evolving nature of corporate governance to change some paradigms at the way we look at governance instead of defensively, but now as a positive tool. After that, we'll then go to media and specifically social media. But I again would like to put governance of media interactions in the context of governance as a whole and a company's communications policy. Again, I'd just like to challenge a few paradigms or assumptions so that we can broaden the way in which we're looking at those things. The next thing will be then to look at the motivations for people who are blowing the whistle, to understand why it is that the whistle is blown and the circumstances that help them to blow or make them blow. And then into the mechanisms of blowing. So we'll be looking at how the different channels help them in their choices. And then lastly, we'll look at how that affects a company's accumulation of reputational value or the depletion of their reputational value. That's basically what we're going to do. So let's go. The emerging governance environment. In the old days, governance was largely developing with company law, and a lot of people still related very closely to company law. But as we heard from David's presentation, it's moving more and more towards behavior, and they're becoming a bit divergent. So the causes of the divergence are that society is having a broader expectation of what companies do and what companies are. So just for a moment, imagine the number of companies in the world. In some countries, there are maybe 10 companies, one company per 10 people. In some of them, it's as low as maybe one company per 50. in other markets lower. Of course, it depends how you measure, but these companies have now constituted a population that needs governance. They need to be garnered and directed in a way that society is taking note of. In the old days, when you went to a baron who had capital and you had an idea and you did that, governance was really sort of individual to transactional and then to smaller companies. But the population of companies has grown now to such an extent that it's impacting the environment in every country, and society is then responding to that population. So governance has become integrated into trying to get the best out of companies. And whereas in the beginning we were looking at success in a company as measured by finance, so if you made a profit and paid, distributed, that was fine. What's happening now is that society has much wider expectations of the role of a company within society. So beyond the financial, we're expecting that you will have accountability for your product results, for your process results. So if your cars are causing trouble, you will get in trouble, and it's a governance thing. Volkswagen was mentioned earlier. You know, they had an emission scandal. That wasn't an engineering problem. It was an ethical problem because they knew what they were doing. They actually made a part that falsified information. And society is saying, you can't do that. If you're going to build a car with lower emissions, build it properly, but don't give us false readings. So society is looking now at your products, your processes, your customers, the impact on your customers, the impact on your employees is now, and they are stakeholders, and that's become important. And they're looking at the impact on even the environment. So you can't dump the waste from your factory in the same way as you could in the earlier days. It started with codes that give you stipulations. But again, the trend is that we're moving from the legal multiple rules to reduced rules. In the South African code, they've gone from 70-something items down to 17 principles, 16 plus 1. That's a small principle-based approach to governance. In our own code, the NCCG Nigeria, we have 28 principles. So they're moving from a sort of legalistic, stipulative approach to a societal responsible approach. And that is addressed at the legal entity, the person that is the company, the legal person of the company. And one of the misconceptions we make is that if you put a dozen wise people in the room and each of them is of good character, then the vehicle they're driving, which is that company, will automatically be of good character. It doesn't actually work that way. They need to have their own rules and regulations consciously to determine that they will be of good character. So this is the environment in which we put in social media reporting. So let's look at social media. I personally don't like to call it social media because when you use the term social, it, I think, distracts you from what the real issues are. What's happened recently is that we've moved to digital media. And that digital media movement has come with certain things. So, for instance, the media have always been there. There's always been a fear of journalists. Journalists investigate. If the waste is being dumped behind your factory, they will find it, they will make noise, they will publish it, and society will respond. Now, those same media journalists have gone up, they're digital, you log in and you get the same news. So it's not the media as a thing that's new. What's new in this social construct is this. Originally, the journalist would file a report. He has an editor to satisfy. They will look at it in terms of the impact on maybe advertising revenues, on print runs, the timing. It may not be able to get it onto tonight's run, and so on and so on. What's happened with digital media is that, first of all, the production has been taken away from formal media channels. The production is taking place in a diffuse way outside the control of those who are normally in corporate communications. So, and it can happen very quickly. So whereas you were able to call your press people will talk to the press, there'll be some sort of relationship there. Now, the person who's publishing is not in your control. He's just a stakeholder. And then he publishes according to what he thinks is necessary. The other thing is that the content that they publish is really driven by motivations that are normally outside your normal journalism. Normal journalism tended to be in the public interest and so on, or in terms of entertainment value and so on. These days, the rush to social media is usually because there is no option to get redress. No one rushes out to a medium that doesn't give redress of some sort. If there's a channel to do so, they will go there. So the motivation here is often to do damage, which is different from the original motivation that we've met. And that variety can cause all sorts of things: losses of reputation, damage, loss of information, for instance, on proprietary material, as we've heard, and so on. So companies need to start to regain control of certain parts of their media interaction. And they have to see social media not as the big bad guy out there, but as part of their market communications. And in fact, when you look at the development of media, digital media, when we put it in the context of risk, everybody shrinks and says, oh goodness, it's terrible, what happens? But actually, as we always say with risk, it's the other side of the coin. The first side of the coin is that digital media represent the biggest opportunity for businesses to reach their markets and their customers at the moment. All the platforms have many millions of people, 800 million on Instagram. There are people on emails circulating all over the place. Twitter, instant, reaches the market. So it's actually an opportunity for companies to put their best foot forward. And it's giving them that opportunity to make the statement themselves in the way that they want, to the markets that they want, and they can target those markets, and they have instant feedback or very quick feedback on whether the market is responding or not, certainly quicker than putting it in a magazine that you read on board. You can't count that, but you can count your media engagement with digital media. So the paradigm that digital media represents a risk from which we should run, and when we sit at boards and leaders of companies and you're trying to run away from these things, it's not necessarily what should happen. The risks exist, and I don't want to play them down, but they're also your opportunity for branding. And your branding is the positive side of your reputational investment, the growth of your brand equity there. So that's the other aspect. So having got this, why do people then, why do they go to social media? All right. The most common thing is that they are not convinced that they have a channel to bring it to someone's attention. So you're taking your dog for a walk and you're passing the factory and you see that they're dumping chemicals in the stream, you see dead fish and so on. Who do you report to? Why? That's a public interest report, really. You're looking at the environment. It's a bad thing for your environment. If you go to the company, what do you expect? If the company has a reputation already for being a tyrant in the area, not listening, and so on, it's unlikely that they're going to go in and file and say, I want to see your customer relations person. They're going to look for a third-party method to get it out. Now, that could still be a newspaper, which is not your social media, so to speak, but they need to choose a channel. And what companies need to do, therefore, is they need to be thinking in terms of What are we doing that can generate these reports? How do we approach business on an ongoing business that contains and reduces these things? And then, because they are risks, how do we plan for them and how do we respond to them when they happen? So, if a company does not have an ethical view of itself, then it has not taken the decisions in advance about how it might respond to either process situations like getting rid of waste, or environmental conditions, or just business ongoing operations. One of the key things about ethical behavior is that the decisions need to be taken in advance of the event. You need to know that in this company, we do this way. And if there's a discussion that leaves other possibilities, you will be able to say, sorry, we don't do that. Or we do it this way because. So the decisions come up front. And these are decisions which sit very squarely at the board level. The executives, of course, have to be ethical in their conduct of the business, but the responsibility for the character and tenor sits at the top. You can't have a board that says things and does things and then knows that the way that they are processing a transaction is unethical, but we need the business. You can't sit in a board meeting and say, my friend, they've had 6 months of no revenue. Here comes a good deal, and you're now giving me soft ethical reasons why we can't do the transaction. You have to be able to take the decisions based on your own ethical compass. And that's not a fixed compass. Each company has to take it. But more and more, society is closing in on companies with expectations. So you are not in the court of law, you're in the court of public opinion. And that's very different. So although there are laws, there's plenty of material in the libraries, there's law that's been published and so on. What people are expecting is different now. They're expecting civic behavior by the companies. And it is the civic behavior and their perception of your matching the civic expectations that will drive their response to you and your products. And of course, there are benefits to that, which we'll come to. So let's move on from that. What can you do when there are events or things that trigger or potentially trigger a social media response? You can stay silent and hope that it blows away. But things in digital media, you know how things get forwarded very quickly? They can explode so quickly that by the time you respond, it's actually burst a balloon. So it's very important to decide why it is that you're keeping quiet. If you are going to respond, how do you respond? Are you going to, you have to have a way of responding that you've thought about beforehand. Will it be that a manager responds? Will it be a communications group that responds? What you don't want is individual people responding, people asking your directors and they're all saying something different, people getting in touch with management and they're also saying something. You get a diffuse response. As a company, you need to be looking at what's the challenge, what's our response, what's the appropriate level and timing of the response. Some people, of course, go on the offensive, block the offender, go out for consequences, try to take actions to damage. That's a potential response, but as an independent company with its own life and reputation to protect, it isn't always the best response. Removing the offending content, yes, very, very possible. Sometimes you can say, for instance, to Facebook that this is offensive for this reason and so on, and you can get things taken down. There are actions to that. But you see, all these are based on you having a communications framework that sets social and digital media in the context of your full communications, not as a separate thing that hovers in the background. And that means it has to come to the table in terms of your communications reporting to the board and your communications decisions at the board. As a board member, how much do you know about your company's use of digital media? Beyond the fact that we're now on Twitter, we now have a whatever Instagram account. Is that all you know at the board? Have you asked about what your communications people are trying to do? Do you have, is it part of your strategy in terms of, yes, they're all digital media, but they deal with different strata in the market, different segments of your marketplace. How have you pitched as exec? How have you pitched your strategy in these areas to match the media that you're using? This is not new. We did it with whether to put in a magazine or whether to put in a newspaper or whether to go on the radio with jingles or whatever. So again, I situate it in the context of a structured communications and media policy. You've got to look at it that way, and that should give you a safer landing. I'm going to move on. I'm sure with the questions we'll get to that. But so what are the areas of concern? David mentioned earlier, somebody put something in an annual report. That's a regulatory compliance requirement. Suddenly someone else takes off with that, and that becomes a business opportunity. That's a risk. Very true. So there are the risks that have to do with the business, the ongoing business, and those will elicit a different set of responses and a different way of dealing with. There are then those that we've dealt with or mentioned earlier, which is the public interest ones. Each company therefore needs to understand, as you do with strategy, what is our business environment? What are the imperatives for us? And then they must identify themselves in terms of how they position the elements of their character and their expectations of themselves as civic citizens. Now, not civic individuals, but a civic corporate citizen with responsibilities. And once you start to look at it that way, the areas of concern start to settle in terms of what people might report, what we're doing. Let's give an example. A company is doing something, for instance, like dumping waste, that is damaging to the environment. Somebody raises the matter. The company responds in a structured way. We're aware of it. This is what we're doing. We're retooling and we're redeveloping. In 18 months, it's done. It contains the matter. So it's possible for a corporate citizen to be responsible with the information it has, even about things that are not going as it wants them to go, as opposed to hiding it under the table and not doing. What are some of the reasons that things don't get reported? The first is that the people doing wrong, so to speak, the people who direct the wrong, are usually very powerful. Chief culprits, very, very strong founder CEOs. The combination is lethal. And then you have strong CEOs who are titans, and then strong heads of unit. So for instance, you have a construction company. You know, or somebody in your company knows that, I won't name a profession, let's say your quantity surveyor actually is the one who supplies all the steel and cement for your projects. Your staff know, but they say nothing. So you go out to make bids, and the bid price is dependent on what your insider decides that he's going to charge the company for those materials. Your staff know. It's affecting the company. Nobody says anything. Why is that? You have a strong person, usually, on top. If you dare whisper it, you will be victimized, rushed out of office, you will be in trouble, basically. So you say nothing. Meanwhile, the owners of the company are wondering why it is they're not getting the bids, or why they're getting turnover but no returns. Whistleblowing is actually very, very good, and it's a very strong pillar for companies that are serious about improving themselves and the way they do business. For companies that have a broad-based view of their success and results, they need to encourage and strengthen their whistleblowing mechanisms. You need to have a safe channel where somebody says, every time that cement arrives on that site, every 6 trailers, 1 trailer gets booked in but doesn't enter the store. Somebody needs to bring it out in a safe way and have it known and get it into the company's behavior. Now, if they're going to be victimized, if it's going to be...
Not to interrupt you, Mr.
Yes.
Cookie, but we will ask you to wrap up in 2 minutes.
Yes, that's fine. Yes, that's fine. So this is why the character of the company is determined by the stakeholders inside and by your stakeholders outside. And what companies need to do, therefore, is to put in place a strong communications framework, and that will be driven by a board that understands the dynamics at that level, and then make sure it permeates. If the tone at the top is not there, it's never going to happen, because the beneficiaries are stacked up in steps below that. So I think that's basically it. I think, yes, I'm happy to stop there, and I'm very happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cookie. And I hated to interrupt you, but there are quite a few questions.
No. Yes, we do have.
Try and maintain our timing as much as possible, because we appreciate that people commit to a certain amount of time, so we don't want to go outside that. I'm going to take on a little bit of responsibility for addressing 1 or 2 questions to Mr. Olatunji as well. But one of the questions I do want to ask you, I mean, there were a couple of questions that came in ahead of the session. A couple have been put on the Q&A, but one of the things that is very clear from what you've said is that companies must have social media and digital policies. Now, would you put those together, or would you separate the two? And if so, why? Is there something that is different in the one from the other?
Was that to David or to me?
That's to you, Mr. Cookie.
Yes, okay. I firmly put them together in the context of communications. The message, it's the message of the company, and those things are just channels. So the channels will include radio, will include newspapers, will include digital and other media. So I see them as channels within a strongly coordinated communications policy.
Both presentations is how much corporate governance is actually a risk mitigating and risk assessment tool. And I think that one of the things that might make a difference in the way boards approach corporate governance is if they are very clearly understanding of that role that corporate governance can play. I find that typically what tends to happen is when corporate governance issues are raised, there's a certain amount of, oh God, this is too much, it's a bit boring, we can't deal with it. So from your perspective, how do you think you can grab a board's attention and make them focus on the issues you have discussed? And Mr. Olatunji, I will also ask you that question as well. Sam, could you address that first?
I think that's something we've seen a lot with risk. People decide on a product, people decide on a path of action, and then they say, have you cleared it with risk? Risk isn't something we sort of put like a lolly on top. It's not a cherry on top of everything else you've done. It's an intrinsic part of the way that you do business and an intrinsic part of the way that you make choices. So the first thing is that I'll put the risk in the middle there. The other thing is that governance also is not, it's the old governance approach was again that when we finished, all that we're doing, we'll now check that we haven't broken any laws. All right. So again, it was a compliance approach. And that's why I mentioned that all the codes are shrinking now from stipulating to non-prescriptive, principle-based. So we're looking at the content of the character of the company. And whether it's a large company or a small company, and this applies even to smaller companies who haven't yet put their boards in place and so on. This is about the behavior of the company in the business space. We've opened up now the way in which you can invest in companies across borders. If you ask now, the people here with shares in Apple, shares in Ford, and so on, and you're sitting in a place 200 miles from your capital. People need to be able to depend on what your company is saying and doing, and things like your share price and your market valuation. So for them to depend on that, you have to be solid. When they slice that, they have to find the same thing inside as outside. So it's not, the governance has to move from being something that's added to something that's intrinsic to the way that day-to-day business is conducted. So management and board will ask themselves, is this consistent with who we are? If we look at our mission statement, does it work? Does this go with our vision for society, our place in society as a business? Those are the things that get asked in the course of what they're doing, not at the end.
Yes, and Mr. Olatunji made this point actually quite strongly, that it is something that the company must have as part of its intrinsic values. You must.
You mean about risk? Sorry, Mrs. Belo-Osagie, please, can you come again?
Ethical. But I'm asking Mr. Olatunji to. I'm going to ask you to comment on. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. I can just hear you. Can you please start again? Is it our own here?
Yes, I'm going to ask you, as increasingly become a tool for managing risks of a company. You've talked about corporate espionage. That is a risk that a company faces. But within the context of corporate governance, how can you make that something that companies understand as part of their risk profile and something that they should be?
No.
Have I been clear?
Yes, you asked me about how can we make. The thing is breaking off.
Okay. All right.
It's not on my end here. It's not from my end here.
I see only 3.
All right. My apologies if that is the case. Can everybody else hear me? Mrs. Ehiwere, can you hear me?
I can hear you, ma.
Yes, we can hear you, ma.
Okay. All right.
Okay,
then I am not entirely. Okay. All right. Can you just comment
now?
Yes.
All right. Sorry, we're wasting time on this backwards and forwards. So my apologies to all participants. And I will just ask Mr. Olatunji to speak to corporate governance as part of the risk profile of a company and how it can be addressed. As part of the risk profile of a company.
Thank you very much. If you ask me for a definition of corporate governance, in the context of your question, I'll be quick to say that corporate governance is actually how organizations respond to their strategic risk. And that's the reason why organizations now in the Western world, they cannot start a board meeting without risk being the number 1 item on the agenda. Every organization, especially 100 FTSE, 300 FTSE, in every board meeting, risk is number one on the agenda. It doesn't matter where the industry is. It doesn't matter which the company is. You have to talk about the risk, because by and large, what you do on behalf of investors to manage risk. And if that is so, and it is so, then organizations must no longer pay lip service to risk. As a matter of fact, the risk culture in an organization like Mr. Cookie said, is not just that we are paying lip service to it, but it's now becoming intrinsic part of our strategy. Risk has to be embedded in the strategy and the culture of the organization. It has to be so. Because by and large, the stakeholders actually, they are watching, right? For organizations who are risk is taken very seriously, they are only attracted to that. For instance, if you are bringing me into your factory and you are not taking care of how I could sleep, I could break my backbone, I could, fall down, then I may not likely be interested in working for. And there are also suppliers that will not supply to organizations that are not taking risks very seriously. So every organization now has to know what risk management is, starting from identification of your risk, categorizing your risk, estimating them.
Mr. Olatunji, what would be the kind of questions that the organization should ask itself in relation to corporate espionage and risk? What are the assessment questions that you would be recommending?
Yeah, concerning corporate espionages, how sensitive is this information? How costly will this be if this trade secret is leaked out? What will be the impact upon the organization? What will be the estimated maximum loss if this information is released to rivals? How will this breach affect this organization? What is the frequency at which this risk, this espionage can be stolen by rivals of the organization? Then, for instance, also the staff we have within the organization, the MPs that are here, how loyal are they? Do you know them? What's their background? Do you understand? Who are they talking to? Who are they working with? Risks about them have to be carried out very well, especially if it is a high-risk company, because you also have to categorize that. Are we a high-risk company? Because the risk in an education company might not be the same as a manufacturing company. So you've got to look at all that very well. Then you look also at categories of the risk. Is it the risk of sickness is different from the risk of IT breaches? So those are all the questions that you ask yourself before you can arrive at a risk culture.
Yes, that's understood. Thank you. I've looked at some of the questions that have been submitted, and I suspect that we are going to have to reply to a few of them in writing. But within the limited amount of time that we have left, I will try and address a couple of the questions that have been raised. For Mr. Cookie, the one question that has been raised is, what are the best practices for responding to whistleblowers when concerns are raised via social media? You spoke to this a little bit, but do you sort of have a corporate playbook that you recommend to those you advise?
I think it depends largely on the nature of the report. Some reports deal with something that's, for instance, an illegal activity that the company may be undertaking and so on. So the response there would be, I think, slightly different from a response where it's, let me say, another impact. And certainly that would also be different from where it's a grievance. One of the things that companies need to do, they need to contain the sorts of things that will go out. So again, at the board, you're often not looking at grievance policies. They come up for review. Everybody's tired, it's the last thing to do, and everybody says, yeah, approved, approved, approved. But the grievance policy has been approved for the last 7 years, 9 years, and things have changed. And everybody's saying approved, approved, approved. So I think the key thing is, The key thing is
connection challenges with Mr. Cookie. We'll just give him a minute.
Can you hear me? I heard you.
Yes, you're very clear, Mr. Cookie.
Okay. Yes. So let's deal with something that's potentially. I mean, we had, say, MTN's market cap fine. Yes, that's something that's big. If that was reported, for instance, from people tweeting and complaining and so on, perhaps it may not have reached a regulator or whatever. What companies, I think, need to do is to make sure that the things that are potential train crashes get nipped in the bud in terms of taking corrective action as a company. And then, as I said, handling the route to correctness. So, yes, we don't have that. We have a plan. This is the plan. Happy to discuss it with stakeholders. This is where we're going to end up, and that meets our stakeholder and society's expectations. So yes, I don't think it's a playbook. I think it's just the response of a responsible corporate citizen.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very much for that. I believe there was a connection break, and so I would like to be sure that Mr. Olatunji is back as well. I don't know if it was on my side. He is here. Thank you very much.
I'm back here, and I can hear you clearly.
Thank you so much. One of the questions that has been raised is, and it was not raised within the Q&A, but it was raised previously by a direct question, is how do you actually undertake corporate espionage investigations? What do you do, practically speaking?
Well, it depends on the extent to which you want to go, one. Then it also depends on the extent of impact that the breach has had on your organization. If it is something minor, if it is something minute and all that, and you don't actually want to make a public furore of it, you could actually send a committee within the organization and deal with the issue. And once the issue is dealt with, you can transfer it to a disciplinary committee if you have a disciplinary committee that is effective within your organization. And whatever they say will be final with that. But if it's so huge, you know, at times it could also transcend an organization even to societal values. Understand? Then the law has to be brought in then. You know, there are so many Spanish cases now with FBI, for instance. So you could actually bring in the police, you could actually, you know, go to court also to seek injunction, you know, to stop the continuation of the breaches, you know. So it depends. You can do it within, and you can also take advantage of the legal, what is available within the organization's law to deal with it. Sorry, the societal law to deal with it.
But that tells us about the response. I think the question was more addressed to the issue of how do you actually undertake the investigation. But maybe that is something that you will reply to in writing unless you feel you are giving away your corporate secrets as to how this is done. So maybe we won't take you too far along that path.
Thank you.
Can I add something?
Yes, Mr. Cookie.
You know, just a quick thought that came as he spoke is that I think one of the important things companies need to do if they're serious and they want to get this embedded in the culture of the company, they need to be very strong on the reporting methods and the protection for those who report. So they've got to communicate to their people, and I don't mean just internal people, even external people. If you communicate to your internal and external people that, look, we take this seriously, we're doing the best we can, we need your help, report it, and through this channel, it's safe. So you then set up channels, for instance, that are not internal. It's not going to the same tyrant who is oppressing you in the company. It goes out to a dedicated line or email or whatever that you know protects you. if you don't demonstrate that seriousness, then of course nobody's going to put his head above the line because he'll get shot. So I think one of the key things that people internally and externally will be looking for is, if they're serious, have they put in place these measures that protect us from when we try to help?
Mm-hmm. Yes. I'm actually going to take advantage of Mrs. Ehiwere's presence, since she is a corporate secretary, and this is something that she deals with. But Mrs. Ehiwere, although you are not a panelist, I'm going to draw on your expertise and your thinking. Would you suggest that a corporate secretary, a company secretary, should be a whistleblower, take up that role, given all the dangers and difficulties that are associated with it?
Thank you, Mrs. Belo-Osagie. I think when it's necessary, the company secretary may have to play the role of a whistleblower. We have instances where the directors could be defrauding the company. We have instances where the directors are engaged in a criminal, they are running the company in a criminal matter, and there are going to be there are going to be liabilities that will be incurred when push comes to shove. Ordinarily, the company secretary does not owe fiduciary duties to the company, but in certain instances where the company secretary is a beneficiary of whatever it is that had gone wrong, then that company secretary has fiduciary duties. So it will be in the company secretary's interest to whistleblow where there is an exposure for that company secretary. There are a bit of exemptions to that provision, because we have some laws that makes the company secretary liable, as well as the directors. For example, in section 49 of the Federal Inland Revenue Service Establishment Act, and also in the Pension Reform Act, where the company secretary knows that these offenses are being committed and the company secretary is keeping quiet.
So actually, this is a broader role that the company secretary ought to play on a corporate board, and it's something that I suspect many participants may not be fully aware of. I think there were quite a few questions around whistleblowing and the concerns that these raise. Somebody has, I'm not going to read the whole question, but I think that the concern of the person may be around the fact that the whistleblowing process is not as widely utilized as people think it should be. People are nervous about reporting their seniors in the hierarchy and so on and so forth. And the person is asking what alternate solutions might be possible to ensure the company and the board are made aware of these issues. I know you've talked about internal reporting as well as external reporting, but I suspect that the questioner is perhaps asking if there are any additional routes other than those.
Yes, I think one of the biggest deterrents is to reporting. We've mentioned, which is that the strong men who have the ability to move the organization in a direction are ever present. So it's almost puts one in challenge, and that's why you have an upstairs downstairs mentality. It's like, I can't take on the Titan. So the ability to report without becoming the focus needs to be communicated in the company. So if you have a whistleblowing thing that goes to, I don't know, the head of HR, who happens to be, very tight with the powers that be, you will not report. You have to be sure that in the process of reporting, you won't then get exposed. So you report to a safe channel, and then the thing starts getting investigated. And as the information comes out, you find that your identity has been revealed. you lose your job. You have a lot more to lose, even though your intent was to improve the environment, business, internally, whatever. So I think again, for companies to show they're serious, they need to let it be safe and make sure that those who report are protected. And then they have to show that actions have been taken. If something is reported about, for instance, the person who's dealing with material on projects and nothing happens, strike one, precedent. The next person does it. Same happens, nothing happens. So you start to build sacred cows. You start to get people that if you report, nothing will happen. So you might as well leave it. It's not my father's company. If when it comes to the attention of the governance system, and here I'll put the internal audit as a strong player and the audit committees and then into the board, if when it comes to their attention, there's a zero tolerance approach to it, then even the guys who are very strong, even if they're very good at their jobs, when consequences start to show, then it will build the confidence of those who report. Otherwise, there is no point. It's a waste of time to expose themselves to a risk when nothing will be done. Governance needs to show that when it comes to our attention, we will take action, and the action will be appropriate and instant.
Yes. Thank you. I am looking at the time, and I'm conscious that we literally have reached the end of our session. I think that what I'd like to promise the participants is that in addition to receiving a recording of the session, that they will receive the slides that were not shared on the screen, and also perhaps a few written remarks in response to the questions that have been raised, because there are several fairly interesting ones that I think would take a little bit too long to chat about. That being said, therefore, I think I probably will need to end the session with my thanks to all of the panelists and to all of the participants for spending this time with us. My apologies that we've had a few internet connection challenges today. It's not something that we are happy about, but as we all know, it does happen. May I take the opportunity to remind everyone that the ICE series continues, and there will be another session next week that people might find it interesting to join. Finally, may I thank particularly Mr. Cookie and Mr. Olatunji for their time and their deep expertise. And may I thank my co-moderator, Mrs. Ehiwere, for spending time with us as well, and for reverting to being a panelist at such short notice. Thank you all very much.